The Last Turtle, Zero, Zen, and the Culmination of Faith by Jim Reddell. Introduction. In your Zen readings, or in time spent talking with others about Zen, whether you realize it or not, you've almost certainly encountered some version of the phrase, "It's turtles all the way down." The phrase originates from an ancient cosmological explanation of how it's possible for the world to sit in space. An explanation that goes something like this. The world rests on the back of a turtle, which presumably must rest on the back of another turtle, which rests on the back of yet a third, and so on, endlessly. Whenever someone asks for a final cause, the response is a shrug, a smile, and the implication that there is no bottom, only infinite turtles. In Zen, the turtle story is often repackaged as wisdom. Reality is an illusion. Concepts are traps. The desire for explanation is evidence of limited understanding. Ask too many questions, and you're told you're missing the point. Better, it seems, to sit quietly, empty the mind, and wait for understanding to arrive on its own. And yet, here you are, still asking questions. This is not a failure. It is the beginning. In fact, it is the entire reason this book exists. The Last Turtle, Zero, Zen, and the Culmination of Faith begins with an unfashionable but necessary proposition. If Zen actually works, if it reliably produces clarity, the end of suffering, and genuine serenity, then it must be doing something. And if it is doing something, then that activity must rest on something. Not a belief, not a tradition, not an aesthetic. Something stable, something that can be examined. A Last Turtle. The book is written for three kinds of readers. First, those considering Zen, those who sense there may be something important here, but cannot yet distinguish the essential from the ornamental. Second, solitary practitioners, those practicing sincerely, reading deeply, meditating faithfully, and quietly wondering why the promised transformation never quite arrives. And third, long-time students, those who may feel unsettled, unvalidated, or quietly unsure about what their practice is actually accomplishing. At the center of this exploration are the teachings of Zero, drawn from the late Zen master Joshu Sasaki. As used here, Zero is not a metaphor, not a philosophical position, and not a clever way to avoid explanation. It is a description of activity. From zero, all activity inevitably arises. And just as inevitably, all activity returns to zero. This is not an abstract claim. It is observable. Every thought, every emotion, every identity, every intention inevitably arises, manifests briefly, and inevitably disappears. What we call self, what we call world, what we call practice, all follow this pattern. Seen this way, zero is not another teaching among many. It is what gives all teachings meaning. Zen is filled with diverse teaching vehicles: suffering and the end of suffering, clarity and confusion, mindfulness and distraction, discipline and spontaneity. These can often appear arbitrary, even contradictory. But contradiction arises only when these teachings are mistaken for absolutes. They are not absolutes. They are tools. And tools only make sense when you understand what they are being used for. The teachings of Zero provide that context. They do not replace Zen frameworks. They support them. They allow us to evaluate them, not based on how they feel or how persuasive they sound, but based on what they do. At this point, we must address a word that is both unavoidable and deeply misunderstood: faith. Faith is often presented as the counterpart to reason. Where reason ends, faith begins. Where evidence is lacking, faith fills the gap. In many spiritual traditions, the limitation of reason becomes the justification for faith in something higher, something unknowable, something beyond scrutiny. This framing is convenient, but it is also misleading, because it treats faith as belief. And belief, in this sense, is passive. It is something you hold. This book takes a different position. Faith is not belief in what lies beyond reason. Rather, faith is the activity of assigning authority in the face of uncertainty. Every day, you act with incomplete information. You rely on sources you have not fully verified. You follow instructions you did not create. You trust interpretations you did not independently derive. This is not irrational. It is necessary. You cannot function without assigning authority. The question is not whether you have faith. The question is where you place it. Seen this way, faith is not mysterious. It is practical. When you follow a teacher, you are assigning authority. When you adopt a method, you are assigning authority. When you trust a text, lineage, a tradition, or even your own intuition, you are assigning authority. And importantly, this assigning is not permanent. It evolves. The progression of faith often begins broadly. A belief in a tradition, a historical authority, or a cultural inheritance. Over time, this tends to narrow to a specific teacher, a specific method, a specific interpretation. And in the case of Zen, if the path is followed to its conclusion, this progression culminates in something both simple and unsettling. Faith as the assigning of authority in the face of uncertainty eventually manifests as practice, and ultimately as something we will call manifesting the norm. This is the culmination of faith. Not its abandonment, but its refinement. At every stage of this progression, faith operates through what can be called the appeal to authority. This phrase is often used as a logical fallacy. But in practice, it is unavoidable. You cannot learn without deferring. You cannot begin without trusting something outside your current understanding. The problem is not the appeal to authority itself. The problem is failing to examine it. Who or what are you trusting? Why are you trusting it? What evidence supports that trust? What outcomes does it produce? And perhaps most importantly, when does that authority need to be relinquished? Zen, at its best, does not eliminate authority. It clarifies its function. It reveals that authority is not something to cling to, but something to use, and eventually, completely understand. This book presents a logical, linear description of Zen and the progression of faith. It traces a path from uncertainty to reliance, to refinement, to self-authority, to practice, to manifesting the norm. But you should not mistake this structure for your experience, because your experience will not be linear. It will be uneven. It will be recursive. It will involve progress, regression, confusion, clarity, and repeated adjustments. You will adopt frameworks and discard them. You will trust teachers and question them. You will feel certain, then uncertain, then certain again. This is not a flaw in the process. It is the process. The linear model is a tool for understanding. The lived reality is an ongoing calibration of that understanding. Zen is not a recipe. It is an activity. The title, The Last Turtle, points to the central claim of this book. There is a bottom. Not a metaphysical endpoint. Not an ultimate explanation of existence, but a functional ground. The teachings of Zero are not another turtle in the stack. They are what allow the stack to exist at all. They do not end inquiry. They make inquiry possible. They do not replace Zen. They clarify it. And they do not ask for belief. They invite examination. You do not need to abandon skepticism to read this book. You do not need to adopt new beliefs, new identities, or even the language of Zen. What you need is something far simpler and far more demanding. A willingness to look closely at what you are doing when you seek. To observe how you assign authority. To notice how your understanding changes. And to question, honestly and persistently, whether the path you are on is doing what it claims to do. This is not a passive process. It is an activity. And as with activity, it is described by Sasaki's teachings of zero. And so the journey starts.